Well, good day. Welcome to the 2023 Agri-Pulse Ag and Food Policy Summit. My name is Chuck Connor, and I'm President and CEO of the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives. And NCFC is really proud to be the platinum sponsor of this year's conference, as we have in the past. The information gathered here is going to be fundamentally critical to the writing of the 2023 Farm Bill, and we all know the importance that bill represents. It will set the future direction of farm policy and food policy in this country. It is critical to our future to the next generation. Thank you to Agri-Pulse for being a leader in this area. We look forward to working with them so much and communicating with each one of you as we try and develop the very, very best policies for our farmers and for our consumers going forward in this country.
Our thanks once again to the folks at the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives for their support of this event. Appreciate them stepping out and supporting the Agri-Pulse Ag and Food Policy Summit once again this year. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Spencer Chase. I'm lucky enough to be the managing editor at Agri-Pulse Communications and love getting to work with our team of journalists as well as all of you to help figure out just exactly what is going on in the world of ag and food policy. And I really like the way that we framed the agenda of the day's event. Not only do we have some of the nation's leading policymakers speaking to us, what we are doing is starting a day where we're going to be talking about the next generation of ag and food policy with the next generation of agricultural leaders. And I think that's a great way to frame up the discussion, talking about the challenges that these folks are facing, talking about the policy solutions that they're wanting to pursue, and using that to frame up the way that we're going to talk about the future of ag and food policy throughout the rest of the day. So it's going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing the thoughts from these folks and looking forward to engaging with all of you as we continue our conversation. You will see we'll have the opportunity, if you just tried out Slido, don't lose that link. We will open the opportunity for all of you to submit some questions for this panel later on in our discussion. Please do, if you have a question that comes to mind, submit it whenever you see fit, and we'll get to that as we continue our conversation here. Going to introduce our panel now, starting on my right, your left. Going to be joined this morning by Trent Kissee, the Director of Ag and Natural Resources for the Muscogee Nation. Next to Trent is Matt Fimon, the the chair of the Young Farmers and Rancher Committee at the American Farm Bureau Federation. Next to Matt is the secretary and herdsman of Unc Brock Inc. and a dairy promoter at Dairy Gal Val, Val Lavigne. Next to Val, Christi Bland-Miller, the Secretary-Treasurer of the National Black Growers Council. And last but certainly not least, we have Mitch Hora, the founder and CEO of Continuum Ag. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us. And I'm going to ask kind of the same question for all of you to start things off. And Mitch, since I introduced you last, I'll go to you first. Question is, tell us kind of the 30-second elevator speech, as you can, about your particular operation, as well as kind of the biggest challenge facing it at this point.
Yeah, is this going? There we go. Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here and ready to rock and roll. Just finished that cup of coffee, so great to be able to have the first question. So, Mitch Hora, my operation is in Iowa. I'm 7th generation on my family's farm, corn, soybean operation, but rye, wheat, barley, open pollinated corn, all kinds of stuff, and about 700-acre operation. Continuum Ag is a company that helps farmers implement regenerative systems. And I think, the opportunity really being around how do we do more with less? I mean, the definition of sustainability, my word was regenerative. To me, the future of ag is a more regenerative future where we're farming with Mother Nature and not as much against her. And we've got a long way to go. Only about 4 or 5% of growers are implementing regenerative systems in my definition, meaning that we're looking at, using no-till, using cover crops, things like that. Long way to go, but it is more profitable, it is more resilient, but it takes a learning curve to be able to change paradigms in agriculture.
Thanks. Christi?
Yeah, it's Christi Bland-Miller. I'm a 4th-generation farmer in the Mississippi Delta. Our family farm is a little over 1,400 acres. We primarily grow rice and soybeans with an occasional crop of wheat, corn, and grain sorghum. I also am the board member for the National Black Growers Council. I'm the secretary treasurer, and the National Black Growers Council is an organization that represents historically underserved row crop farmers. And our mission is to improve the efficiency, the productivity, and the sustainability of Black row crop farmers. Some of the issues we've seen historically with the underserved is access to land, access to capital, and access to technology. So that's one of the things that we advocate daily for, so that the farmers, specifically Black row crop farmers that are in existence, will be able to be sustainable for the future.
I'm Val Lavigne, sorry, upstate New York. So that is, I was just explaining it to someone, if you look at New York, look at the right-hand side where Albany is, just a touch above Albany, right on that eastern border of New York State, so almost New England. We, my family and I, we milk about 180 cows right now, and we ship our milk to Agri-Mark, and we own Cabot Cheese. I am the herdsman there. I also do all of the book work. I work there with my parents, my husband, and we have 3 small children on the farm, which I am thankful every day that I get to raise the kids where they can run, be free on the farm, and learn about how our nation's food is produced. That to me is such an important part of anything these days, is just knowing where your food comes from, which is why I started up Dairy Gal Val online, to help people connect with their food, learn about how dairy farming works and what we go through every day to be a dairy farmer. I am highly involved in our Young Cooperator program through Agri-Mark. I am currently the YC president there. I also was blessed to serve as the chair of National Milk's YC program last year as well, and I just love to spread the word about dairy, be involved. I feel like that's the future. We need to be involved. We need to have our hands in everything and really be ready for whatever the future throws at us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Fimon. I farm in Southside Virginia, about 2.5 hours from here. Unless you get caught in traffic in Fredericksburg, then it's 4.5 to 5. So I am a first-generation farmer, married to a multi-generational farmer, and I have the great opportunity of being the newly elected Young Farmer and Rancher Chair for American Farm Bureau. With that opportunity, I get to represent and meet with a group of young farmers from 18 to 35 that vary from being first-generational to multi-generational. And two of the biggest opportunities they have, or two of the biggest things they deal with that we hear over and over, is going to be access to rural development. So whether that be broadband or consistent and reliable childcare, and then the other portion is going to be that family farm transition planning.
Good morning. My name's Trent Kissee. I'm the director of the Division of Ag and Natural Resources for the Muscogee Creek Nation, and I'm also a board member on the Intertribal Agriculture Council. I grew up in Northeast Oklahoma on my family's allotment land. We had a small beef herd and a few bison, and now at the Nation I oversee about 700 to 800 head of mama cows, and we keep those all the way through. And we have a tribally owned meat processing facility there as well. Fully USDA inspected. We do a lot of custom stuff and a lot of direct-to-consumer things for ourselves and for the public. We are open to the public. We also have a small retail space there as well. It's located right in the middle of a USDA food desert, which a lot of our business dealings are in Indian country. And a couple of things that I'll sort of mirror that the panel has said: access to capital. And access to land is a huge obstacle in Indian country. Just the historical ownership of land throughout history for Native nations is such that, especially in eastern Oklahoma, you have a lot of fractionated land ownership. There's some complications there with even qualifying for certain conservation programs and other programs due to having to get all the stakeholder input and landowner input. A lot of issues to navigate there with the BIA. And then, of course, just an overall issue with credit access on the whole in Indian country. So a large, overwhelming majority of Native producers are financed through the FSA because that's their only opportunity. And so we have been fortunate to have some Native CDFIs pop up in the last several years, and that's been integral, but we really need some more investment in that area as well.
Very good. Well, obviously a lot of different areas for all of us to dive into to springboard off of that, but I kind of want to sort of strip the conversation down to the studs here, because we have a number of different production systems, a number of different geographies represented here. But frankly, as I look up here, I see, 5, not 6, but 5 well-spoken people, and that are, pretty bright, pretty able to form a sentence together, and really thoughtful about not only their present, but their future also. So I'd like all of you to answer this, but I suppose, Trent, I'll start with you. When you were thinking about, in your upbringing, in your growing up, all of the different directions that life could take you, you chose agriculture. Why?
I think the interesting thing about agriculture is the people. That's one of my favorite things about the industry. I mean, lots of friendly faces in this room. It's something that's important to our people and our culture. A lot of Native communities. Agriculture was the only economic development enterprise. It was the only commerce that was available. And there's lots of good land in eastern Oklahoma. And I just think that that's a great way that we can kind of connect. You said future generations, and that's something I think about a lot. I have 2 kids, 8 and 6. And who knows, just in terms of land scale and things like that, if production agriculture is going to be something they're going to be able to be engaged in. But I think the good thing about that, I used to be an ag teacher as well, and so I spent a lot of time talking to kids about how if you're interested in agriculture, that doesn't mean you can only farm. Sure, we want to increase access to farms, we want to increase access to ranches, but lots of the people in this room are engaged in agriculture and may never step foot on a farm. And so that's something that it offers a lot of diversity for young kids, whether they're tribal citizens or just rural kids growing up in northeastern Oklahoma is kind of where my heart's at. And being able to say, hey, you can see the world, you can travel the world, you can access the world, especially now with the technology that's out there, and you can work in agriculture and around people that are your people. That's something I think is really important.
Matt, you said you were first generation, so why agriculture for you?
My wife told me I was going to do it, but I would say, going back to it is truly there is no better place to raise a family. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and again, I married into it later in life. And I was working corporate job, living in a downtown environment, and now that I have younger children, and to be able to teach them the life skills that you do on a family farm and in that agricultural environment is completely invaluable. The second piece I would say is that opportunity to truly impact everyone in America. You are feeding America. And to be able to have that opportunity and to be able to showcase that and advocate for it, it opens up a whole world of different views.
So my parents are first-generation farmers, and they actually started farming while I was a young child. And I remember when we first got our herd of cows, and I remember the excitement and learning sorry, it might be Christmas, but we're headed to the barn and we're taking care of the cows first, and we'll take care of Christmas later. And that's just something that's been instilled in me since a young age. And I've grown to love it. Sometimes it's a love-hate relationship. Those of you that have especially animals in this room, I'm sure understand. I've gone off and done a couple different things, always still in the ag realm, but I've been off the farm a little bit, and it just keeps sucking me back. It's the passion, it's the being there with your family, working through problems, seeing the good, seeing the bad, and again, getting to raise my children on the farm is just, there's nothing like it. I wouldn't want them to be raised any other way. I was raised that way, and I hope that my grandchildren can be raised that way, so I'm working hard to create a sustainable farm for the future, that future generations to come, so that our farm can see those 5th, 6th generations. And like my counterpart here, my husband actually married into the farm and became a farmer, and I didn't even have to ask him. He just kind of stepped up to the plate and acts like he's been at it, for 70 years, even though he's 34. So he fit in really well, and it's really great to farm with our family.
I was going to say, where do I start? But I've only been married 3 months, so they say you're either married into it or born into it. I was born into it, so hopefully my husband will, identify as a farmer in the near future. I'm still working on that. But yeah, I'm a 4th generation. I didn't really consider ag in college because my parents didn't push it on me. Growing up, I always had a book or a ball in my hand and played basketball in college. So my dad didn't push it on us because he said, if it's not a passion of yours, you won't stick to it. But like you said, the more you're there, the more it just kind of sucks into you. And for me now, what keeps me in it is legacy. If my parents could endure, the interest rates and discrimination with USDA and all of the things people of color and historically underserved farmers have done to keep the land that they have, for me it's legacy to be able to do the same for my children and their children's children.
Yeah, I'll echo right off of that too, that the legacy piece is huge to be able to factor back into being involved in the family farm. But my story is that my first word as a little rugrat was corn. So if I've always been destined to be involved in agriculture, I guess. But really from there, found my path being entrepreneurship. And looking back, it's definitely always been that. But farmers are entrepreneurs. They're the CEOs. They've got to be the CFO, the CTO, and everything else, and all the way up and down the ladder. And so growing up in that system, knowing that, okay, need to be able to carry on the legacy of the family farm. This is our 150th year of farming in Iowa. And so we've got to be able to continue to take care of it for future generations. But the key thing is that we're going to hear a lot today about sustainability. But sustainability only matters if the farm is economically sustainable as well. We are running businesses out here, and I think that's a lot of times forgotten about, that family farming or farms are a lot of times doing it for the lifestyle. As was said, raising kids on the farm is definitely, the best and a huge privilege to be able to do that. My daughter's 1 year old and was still asleep a couple blocks away here when I left this morning. But being able to raise a family in rural America is really great. Being able to instill that legacy of working with the land, of working with Mother Nature, and being what I say as farmers, our calling is to be the shepherd of God's creation, and that's absolutely what we're able to do. And goes all the way down to the little microscopic critters, all the way up to the animals, and don't have any dairy cows. I'm very happy for that, but that legacy is huge, and I think it's something that we should exemplify more as we need to get more people into ag as well.
I got to say, somebody's first word being corn might be the most Iowa thing I've ever heard, frankly. But we'll circle back to that later. But you did touch on something that I wanted to follow up on with all of you, and that was this concept of sustainability, and not only environmental, but also economic sustainability. And so, we've heard a little bit about all of your operations. We've heard about why you're in agriculture. Let's hear about what you're doing to stay within agriculture and to keep that still a profitable business model for you and for your fellow producers. So I'd like to hear how you incorporate sustainability in whichever definition you would like to choose, be it environmental, economic, social, what have you. How is sustainability a part of your operations? And Mitch, I'll start with you and kind of popcorn my way around the stage here for this one.
Like Spencer was saying, we do have to factor in all those, the environmental, social, it's got to be everything together, and I think that's really crucial. For our family operation, we started using no-till in 1978 as a way to cut back on diesel fuel usage and also to protect against erosion. We started using cover crops in 2013, so 10 years into that. That's really been able to help us to build up our soils. We've diversified our operation quite a bit, looking for that economic resiliency, but by improving our soil function, improving the soil health, improving the biological function of the soil, we've been able to reduce our fertilizer by about 50%. We've cut our pesticides by about 75%. We've continued to maintain and even grow our yields, even though last we were in extreme drought. And what we found is that we've really been digging into the economics of our operation, really trying to hone in, and it takes a lot of work. That's why a lot of farmers, it's tough to be able to really dial in. But what we found is that over the last 10 years, 8 out of those 10 years, we were only profitable because of federal farm programs. The last couple of years now, we've weaned ourselves completely off of those federal farm programs and are able to be profitable 100% on our own, which is super empowering to not have to rely on farm policy, not have to rely on the insurance programs and things like that. They're incredibly important. And as I said, a lot of years, they've been able to keep us profitable, been able to keep us in business, and be able to keep us moving forward. But now to be able to wean ourselves off of those by working with that natural breathing system, which is our soil, that's been able to make us really fit into that definition of sustainability, being environmentally resilient and economically sustainable.
So I want to bounce around the stage a little bit on this one rather than just going sequentially, because we've heard from the row crop side. Val, I'd like to hear from kind of the dairy side. How does sustainability incorporate into your business?
So while we're a smaller dairy farm, we cannot afford to put in an anaerobic digester for methane. However, we do capture our manure, spread it on the fields for natural fertilizer, do a lot of the same crop practices that Mitch does. Our sustainable right now is recycling where we can, cutting back, fine-tuning different things throughout the operation. We actually are a huge proponent of diversification, not just counting on that milk check every month. We are diversifying into many different things. So different diversification for a dairy farm. We actually now own 2 food trucks and a catering business, because when you have spare time, why not work some more, right? So we really enjoy doing that, which also gives us a great way to even connect with consumers. We use some of our own products that our milk goes into in our food trucks, which is really a great way to tie that into the consumers as well. We raise about 1,000 turkeys a year for Thanksgiving. We also have started raising our dairy steers for beef. We sell them locally to different families in the community. We also work a lot with our food bank to help make sure that our community is well taken care of. And I do have some chickens on the side. My first word was bird, so it's only right that we have chickens and turkeys, right? But our definition of sustainability is making sure that our operation is diverse enough to carry it through to future generations.
Trent, what about you? What do you think about when you think of sustainability in your operation?
Sure. So we've talked a lot about this, and I think one of the unique things about Indian country is where we are is where we're going to stay, and so we're not looking to expand. You hear a lot about moving overseas or moving to where it's business friendly. We're where we're at, and like many of you in the room, it's a legacy for us. It's generational, and so one of the things we started asking ourselves is all of my employees there at the Nation, we all know each other's kids and we all know each other's families, and so we'll say when it comes to making a decision, we'll say, well, what would Addie's kids want us to do? What would my kids want us to do? What would Riata's kids want us to do? And I think when you start looking at things through that lens, it kind of takes your mindset from like a survival mentality, which we're all everybody involved in ag has been there before. Just trying to survive, make it to the next year. But when you start thinking that in terms of like, what will my kids hope that I did in this case? That really makes the decisions a lot easier, even though it may seem a little more difficult at the time. Things like conservation programs and regenerative farming, regenerative agriculture, those are all buzzwords that are sort of in the media and things now, but it's things that we've been facing for several years. We have these wild changes and significant weather events in eastern Oklahoma. Rains all at once, it seems to right now, in March and April, and then you're done for a significant portion of time, and I know that's not unique to us. So making those decisions to maybe leave a little more standing forage or not graze a pasture when you really think, man, I could run another set of yearlings on this, maybe make a little extra change. You might for now, but again, what would my grandkids want us to do in this case? And am I going to drive by the Muscogee Creek Nations Ranch in 25, 30, 60 years and still see it here? Is the loop square going to be up there on the wall, or is it going to be developed and subdivided and things like that? So for us, it's just been a mind shift, or a shift in our mindset from how do we survive? What do we do for right now to what would our grandkids hope that we did? And that's really helped us.
Thank you. So we have always ran beef cattle, and one thing we have had to do recently is we added in pasture-raised chickens, and we just started raising a flock of sheep as well to really focus on that rotational grazing. Again, going towards that soil health and not having to spend the money on the fertilizer. The other portion we've had to do and focus on quite a bit is direct market to our consumers, and we've struggled with that just because of the access of proper USDA-approved meat processing, be able to sell that, and then also just access to, we struggle with the broadband piece. So we don't have reliable internet where we're at. We actually have to use our home phone hotspot. Kind of crazy to think 2.5 hours from here, and you have to use a phone hotspot. So direct market consumers has increased our profitability quite a bit, but to be able to pick that up ongoing would be a great help.
Christi, we'll wrap up with you. How does sustainability factor into your operation?
Yeah, so with our operation, we really try to do a lot of crop rotation, and we've started implementing cover crops, and it's fun. We actually have a test trial with, excuse me, we have a test trial with Mitchell, so I thought that was really unique. Sorry.
Yep, go for it, go for it.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Testing, testing. Here, try that one again.
Hello? Okay.
There you go.
So on our farm, we've really been doing crop rotation and trying to implement cover crops. It's not as normal as it is in Iowa in the South to do cover crop, because some of the cover crop Mitchell will do on his farm, we don't get the temperatures it's cold enough to kill them. So just trying to find ways to be more sustainable. We've really been fortunate to take to use USDA programs to improve our land so that we can become more sustainable, doing precision land leveling so that we can control how much water uses we're using in the rice fields and things like that.
Very good. Well, while we're talking to you, Christi, let's stick with you because, as we all know, Congress is working on a new farm bill, something that we're expecting to cover quite a bit more as the year continues to unfold. But as all of you think about things that are in the farm bill, things you'd like to see changed in the farm bill, if you happen to have, the ear of the House and Senate Ag Committee chairs, if they were sitting in this room right now, what's the counsel you would give them on things you, for the sake of your operation, for the sake of your fellow producers? What are some things you would encourage for that upcoming farm bill?
Yeah, I would like for Congress to look into more ways to have access to land for beginning farmers and for historically underserved farmers. I would like for them to use some of the conservation practices that we already use, like CSP and EQIP, and set aside some of the money that's already allocated for beginning farmers to increase the value of the land that they have been able to acquire, because a lot of times we have to buy what we can afford, and beginning farmers can usually only afford marginal land. So if they could take access of the programs to improve that land, that would be beneficial. I would also like to see the acreage-based payments that are currently in existence be modified to represent some of the farms. Like, we don't have rice-based acreage on farms we've been growing rice for the last 10 years on. And historically, underserved farmers don't have the same payment. Therefore, if they don't, they would be able to increase their crop insurance coverage if they had the improvement to their land, which would really help them have a safety net in years that they're tough.
Sure. So one of the things that we've been asking for heavily in Indian country is sort of the expansion of Public Law 638, which allows for tribal governments to sort of compact and contract federal services. And so it's worked really well in Indian health. It's worked really well in the BIA. In the last farm bill, we actually had some success and got a couple of pilot programs started, which have been really successful. So we would like to see that expanded. We'd like to see more USDA programs kind of take on the 638 model. I think it's really important to do that well, that we establish a self-governance office within USDA. It's a tricky process, and it can be difficult to navigate both for tribes and for the federal agencies. So I think if we had an office that was kind of the go-to for the USDA, that would be really successful and kind of help implementing those. Another couple things, kind of like Christi mentioned, with the issues of marginal land, especially with the fractionated land ownership in particularly in eastern Oklahoma, but throughout Indian country, being able to kind of access capital and access programs for those more marginal acres. There's a lot of land that could be really productive, whether for agriculture or for some more of these sustainability and environmentally sound models, but they're overgrown with eastern red cedar, they're overgrown with Sericea lespedeza, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of funds to get those lands back to its sort of productive base and where you can run a prescribed fire through there and make it productive. So that's a big ask. There's a lot of funding needed there for access to capital. There's a lot of structural changes for programs in NRCS and FSA where maybe county lines aren't the most appropriate way for us to issue those funds or run those programs. And so being able to work directly with tribal nations and tribal governments that work every single day with their citizens, I think it'd be really good if we could increase the parity there, and where state governments are mentioned, allow tribal governments to be mentioned. My department works really closely with NRCS, and even establishing like our priority resource concerns. If my division was able to have a say in those, as opposed to having to go through the state committees or county committees, that'd be really impactful for our citizens.
Mitchell, I imagine there's a bit of a Farm Bill wish list on your end of the stage here.
Not really, actually.
Okay.
From my side, the biggest thing for me is that I think that the policymakers, as we're going through this, remember that the most important thing in agriculture is farmer innovation. So my ask really boils down to allow for flexibility within programs, allow for more of the research to be done, allow for innovators to be innovative. And what I mean by that is some of the policies around the actual like farm programs themselves, ARC and PLC, for example, some of the things within EQIP, CSP, and the crop insurance programs, there's a lot of restrictions there. It's a lot of keep to the book and stay to the book, farmer. No, stay to the book. Here's what the rules say, only do that. But that really hinders innovation a lot of times. And actually on our farm, as we were trying new things like relay cropping, where we're growing our own cover crop seed, we've had to do that without crop insurance. Because in crop insurance and in the RMA best practices, relay cropping is not one of those things. Even though now this will be our 5th year using relay cropping, and relay cropping added an extra $300 per acre to our bottom line profitability last year. And it was our most profitable acres on our entire farm. But we had to do that for multiple years with no insurance at all because it doesn't fit the book. So I think the biggest thing for me is, we need to continue to maintain a lot of the programs. I haven't heard of any major changes that are going to happen. The main thing is just allow for farmers to be innovative and learn from those farmers. One last thing on that, where it would kind of take pencil to paper here is there are a lot of research dollars that go into agriculture, but a lot of times they go to the NRCS facilities or go to the universities. And that's, I think, where we can ensure that those dollars can go directly to farmers or go directly to for-profit companies that want to do research, that want to help, and want to figure out how we can be more innovative, more sustainable, and more profitable.
So before I move things on to another panelist, we try and have these events be a little bit educational for folks that are maybe kind of dipping their toe into agriculture and ag policy. Mitchell, if you could, a 20-second explanation for the relay cropping concept that you mentioned there.
Yeah, relay cropping is my most favoriteest thing. No, it's I've got a lot of it on my social media channels and stuff, but essentially what we're doing is we plant cover crops in the fall. Okay, so we harvest our corn in usually around October, say, for example. So harvest in October, plant a cover crop, usually cereal rye. Like Christi was saying, it's very different in different parts of the country, but cereal rye in my neck of the woods in Iowa, that cereal rye survives over the wintertime, and here in April, we'll plant soybeans into that rye. Typically, we would terminate about a month later with a herbicide, but in a relay crop, we don't use herbicide, and instead, we harvest the rye over the top of the soybeans in July, and then we come back in the fall and we harvest the soybeans. So the rye was planted in the fall, soybeans planted in the spring, rye harvested in the summer, soybeans harvested in the fall just like normal. And we're using that rye for our own cover crop seed. A huge barrier to diversification is markets. There's no market for rye or for wheat or for oats and stuff in my area. There's some, but not that's going to be anywhere close to competitive to growing corn and soybeans. But growing rye for cover crop seed, that's a local growing market that I can control, and it enables us to be profitable and utilize this conservation practice for directly putting dollars in our pocket.
Very good. So steering things back to the Farm Bill then, Val, when you think about dairy in particular, if you had the Farm Bill writer's ears, what would be on your mind?
Yes, so let me start by saying we're very thankful for the dairy margin coverage program that we've had thus far, especially helping us through the tough COVID years and bad margin years. Thankfully, last year it didn't get used nearly as much as in past years. However, if we could see some updating in the dairy margin coverage, the production levels are very outdated. The supplemental dairy margin coverage program is better, but I believe that there could be some updating as far as production concerns. Operations are not nearly the same now as they were 10 years ago, and I think that seeing an update in that program would be very, very beneficial to dairy farmers. And also, as far as SNAP is concerned, making sure that dairy is able to get in the hands of those that need that delicious, nutritious, nutrient-dense product.
Matt, I know we've covered a lot of turf on the Farm Bill here. Anything that has not been covered that you'd like to dive into in terms of Farm Bill priorities from the perspective of a young producer?
You know, I would say ease of the loan application process is such a difficult process to go through. And as a young farmer, it's hard to show who owns what or who has what or who's doing what, because a lot of it is the parents or the grandparents. So to focus on that in the application process would be great. The other portion I would say, and I'm a huge advocate for this, so I keep going back to it, is the rural development piece. Is one piece that I would like to see is that consistent access to reliable and safe childcare. And as young farmers and as next generation farmers, we have to be focused on being able to give people that opportunity to farm. And if we don't have those basic needs or basic things that we should be able to have that help, that childcare, access to proper health care, and access to rural broadband, we are not going to be able to focus on those next steps.
I want to go to a question that's been submitted from the audience. Would encourage all of you to, as questions come to mind, please feel free to use Slido to submit them. This one from Leah Buckman at Georgetown University. She says, all have mentioned implementing sustainable activities in your systems. In your regional / commodity communities, what do you see as some barriers to entry? And Trent, I want to go to you with that question, because I understand, not only from a sustainability standpoint, there's barriers to clear, but also from a value-added standpoint, there's steps that you and your community have taken to kind of build up a facility that helps with getting to market. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So in December of 2021, we opened Loop Square Meat Company, which is a 25,000 square foot USDA inspected meat processing facility. As you can imagine, during during the pandemic, that was quite the lift. It took help from a lot of folks. A lot of federal agencies pitched in there, EPA, USDA, and they were great to work with. One thing that we've been really thankful for is sort of the investment in that infrastructure. In eastern Oklahoma, there are now 4 tribally owned meat processing facilities, and all of them are either state and or federal inspected. And so that's really great for us, and I realize that's not the case, all throughout Indian country or all throughout the United States. But one area that we sort of see as a weakness now is that workforce development component. So the way that the industry's sort of been laid out, historically, there's not that skilled whole animal, nose to tail butcher labor pool there available for work. And not only that, but there's not really a pool of meat scientists that can take that value add capacity to the next level. So, we're talking about having to go to Oklahoma State University and study meat science and learn about water activity and how, the chemistry of meat and how preservatives or lack of preservatives kind of impact your shelf life and things like that. So when you start talking direct to consumer and things that some of the other panelists have spoken about, those are all really important. And it's not so simple as just getting something put in the cooler and getting it cold and packaged and getting it to folks. And so that's really a hurdle. If we could see some investment in that workforce development component, that would be really critical. And then one other component that I'll mention just briefly before I pass it on is the cold storage. A lot of these things come in waves, and a lot of our operations are not incredibly large, and so we may have 10, 15, 20, a couple hundred head ready at a time, as opposed to having a steady supply all throughout the year. And so as we kind of link that food supply, and we talk about food sovereignty and food security a lot in Indian country, one of the pieces of that is having that be available year round. And so I'm sure there's a lot of time when things are seasonal and it's convenient and it's available, and that's great. But being able to kind of stabilize those products and make them more available throughout the year, I think is really important to the economic viability of a lot of our operations.
Open that up to anyone else who wants to take it, thinking about barriers to entry in terms of sustainability, value-added agriculture. Anything jump to mind for any of you?
Yeah, no, for sure on my side. My company, Continuum Ag, works in 42 states and 20 countries. So seeing these barriers all over the place, not just in my home state of Iowa, but to me, barriers to entry boil down to 2 core things: the logistic risk and the economic risk. And it always boils down to those 2. And for me, I'm talking about row crop farmers adding more sustainable practices like reducing their tillage, adding cover crop, diversifying their system, or cutting back on their synthetic inputs. But it boils down to the logistics. How do I do this? How do I make it work with my equipment? How do I make it work in my geography, in my soils, in my climate, in my crops? Just like Christi was talking before, it's different for every single farm, and that's why we've got to be careful as we're looking at regulation and policy in this, that it is different and the practices are different in all these different geographies. So the logistics, and those logistics impact the economics. How do I do this? But how do I do it and not screw things up? Because I've got to be profitable so that I can do it again the following year. So we're really trying to scale that by helping farmers and providing the technical support that's needed. It just doesn't exist at the capacity needed at our NRCS offices or at the universities. And I think it's a great opportunity for the free market to be able to go and for-profit companies to be able to provide the technical support in helping farmers to overcome those logistic and economic barriers to adopting these practices.
Yeah, I would agree with that because a lot of times we're trying to move in more sustainable ways, but farmers are creatures of habit. I'm going to grow a crop the way I know how to grow a crop. And for example, like with rice, we always flood our rice fields, but the studies have shown that there's an increase in methane gas. So the climate smart commodity groups that are paying you to become more sustainable want you to go to alternate wetting and drying. But like years like this year, it was super hot and we had a drought. And if you were just alternate wetting and drying, you literally had your wells and your motors running the entire time, and the price of diesel was so high, and then the price of fertilizer was so high. So there's a lot of risks that the farmers are taking in order to become more sustainable for future generations. So just finding resources to help offset that until we can become self-sufficient in those sustainability practices.
Yeah. So in the Northeast, I guess dairy is a very interesting thing to get into. Someone can't just buy a farm, buy a herd of cows, and start shipping milk nowadays. The market is very closed off, very competitive. You are very lucky to have a market at this point, and there's not markets out there taking new farms, things like that. So being able to start up a dairy in the Northeast, you either have to buy out someone that's exiting the business or get very, very lucky. So making that more accessible is really, really important. And also, I'm going to echo, I think you said something about broadband earlier, and you said something about broadband. I live 30 minutes from Albany, the capital of our state. I also have to use a hotspot to get internet at my house, which also prevents us from using a lot of technology to become more sustainable on the farm. Very, very interesting. And I mean, we're not in a rural area by all means, and to not have access to something so simple in the year 2023 is very just insane, so.
And Matt, I know one of the things that you and I talked about kind of in advance of this discussion is sort of that concept of, okay, you mentioned that you were a first generation within agriculture, but your wife is not. Let's talk about that process of transitioning the farm over to you and to your generation. Are there things that folks on Capitol Hill, folks at USDA, fill in the blank government entity could do to kind of grease the wheels on that process? Or what do you think are things that could be done to kind of ease the transitional process as we shift the land from, the current generation to the next?
I think one thing that always has to be kept in mind during that process is just because somebody is part of that family or married into that family that is now farming, it does not mean they now have it or they have access to it or it's going to be given to them. It needs to be bought and paid for, and the person that developed it or brought it up, they deserve to be financially compensated for what they have done. So there's a huge process with that when it comes to loan applications. Going back to loan applications and understanding that as a young farmer, I'm trying to buy roughly 1,000 acres of land, and how am I going to do that? Because it's not in my name right now. It's actually in my father-in-law's name. So how can we transition as we go through that loan application process and ensure that we're focusing on, yes, it's not his, but he is farming it. How can we make that ease?
Very good. Christi, I know you had some thoughts on that as well, just in terms of that land transition to the next generation. What could be done to kind of make that a little bit easier?
Well, with historically underserved farmers, a lot of heirs property, meaning there's no clear deed or title to land that you're getting access to. I think there should be more resources to help sort out that. Also, just helping younger farmers understand the risk that they're taking. They're taking a lot of risk. Just because you inherit a farm doesn't mean, a lot of times you're inheriting debt as well, specifically from historically underserved farmers. And that was new for me. I was just like, people think you have a leg up. You do, as far as having people that have come before you that can help walk you alongside it, but they don't always come with the capital that you think they would just because you're generational. So just having resources to offset that.
Anyone else on thoughts on transitional resources, Mitchell?
Yeah, real quick, and seeing like a question too on access to land and stuff, stepped up basis. If we don't have stepped up basis and we're looking at paying capital gains taxes on the value of all this land as it gets passed down generation to generation, that land is gone to pay the taxes. That would be the quickest killer to the family farm, is if we got rid of stepped up basis. And then also death taxes. If there are death taxes that come in that are too overbearing here, that'll also just wipe out anything that has to be passed down. And then there's nothing, even if you have built up some equity in your family operation, that would be just completely annihilated. As far as accessing land, I mean, to try to go buy land, I had the opportunity to buy a little 40-acre chunk a couple years ago. It was about $9,000 an acre at that time. Today, that same piece of land would be $18,000 an acre easily. So just to buy 1 acre of decent land in Iowa. And so having that kind of capital, I mean, you're talking huge dollars, and that's just for the land. So got to be able to have easy access to beginning farmer loans and stuff. I think that was mentioned before. Definitely a key piece.
Trent, Val, any thoughts that haven't been
I'm
shared at
just,
this point?
I'm just going to echo what they said. It's almost scary to look into the future of trying to get into the farm on that level rather than just technically be an employee of the family farm. It's scary, and if it's not done right, then it's detrimental to the farm. Very important to ease that transition, more education about how to make those transitions go smoothly, and definitely just streamlining that process and making sure that everything can run without a hitch.
Sure, just real quick in terms of getting access to land and kind of stepping up and growing. A lot of that is going to be done on those marginal acres. And when I'm talking marginal acres in eastern Oklahoma, it's significantly different than marginal acres in, for example, Iowa or Illinois, the Corn Belt. And some of those lands shouldn't be used in production agriculture, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. But a lot of those properties can and should be, and they'd be economically viable. It'd be great for that family. It'd be great for the local economy. But again, it's full of eastern red cedar, it's full of Sericea lespedeza, it's overgrown and unmanaged. So it's going to take a lot of money to get those properties to a point where they can become productive. And so as young and underserved populations kind of think about growing and think about expanding, we're going to have to take a look at how we get those, those overgrown parcels that are probably right now unfit for production. How do we get those back into production if they can be, or how do we get them, sequestering carbon if they can't be put into production?
So, folks, we've covered a lot of turf here over the course of our discussion, and we've got time for about 30 seconds from each of you, and I'd like to wrap things up on a high note. So as we do wrap that up, Trent, I'll start with you, and we'll just kind of work our way down the line. 30 seconds on something that excites you about the future of agriculture, the future of your operation, the future of farm policy. Tell me what's got you excited about the future.
Well, I think just sitting up here on this panel is exciting. I think knowing that there's lots of folks, a lot of the brightest young minds that I know are working in ag, and that's something that really excites me. I get a lot of motivation and inspiration from just being around those young men and women that are out there that really want to dive deep and figure out how do we make this thing work. So that's probably something that I'm most excited about, getting to work with young people. We have an ag youth program at the Division of Ag and Natural Resources at the nation, and so I come into contact every day with young people who want to devote their lives to this. They want to devote their lives to making sure that agriculture is an important part of their life and their community, and that's really exciting to me.
I would have to echo that. I'm really excited about the conversation that's going on around it. It's consistent, it's ongoing. We have people that want to get involved. We're seeing an uptick in urban farms in transition and showcasing farm stands and getting people involved from that perspective. And we just can't let that conversation die. We have to keep it going and keep the excitement around it.
I'm going to kind of echo that as well. I'm really excited about the young minds coming up in agriculture. I'm excited that the world is starting to realize that they do need to, in fact, be worried about where their food comes from, educate themselves on where their food comes from, and make sure that The keyword sustainability, keep those farms sustainable for the future to feed the future generations and feed the world.
I'm really excited just to be here, to be at the table. On my mic, never mind. I'm really excited just to be here at this event because one of my colleagues always says, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. And if we're going to be the next generation, we need to be the next generation of policymakers that are actually making policies that affect our farm. I'm excited to just hear about all the things that young people are doing in ag, because we do need to know where our food comes from and need to have a hand in making and feeding the world.
I'm so excited for this question. I've been waiting for it the entire event. Okay, quick show of hands. Who here has heard of the 45Z tax credit? This is the most exciting piece of legislature, and there was maybe 5% of people in this room that have heard of it. The 45Z tax credit was passed with the Inflation Reduction Act last August, and it allows for Scope 3 reduction carbon tax credits to be paid, including your Scope 3 reductions for renewable fuels. What this means for the renewable fuels market and for the commodities that play into that is massive, massive dollars. On our operation, it would add about $160 per acre into our operation. We've reduced our carbon footprint of our corn from being 29.1 carbon intensity points per megajoule of energy, which is the standard, 29.1. Our farm is negative 4.4. That would garner $1.81 in these low carbon fuel tax credits. It is the biggest opportunity for our family farms. And what I need is a connection to the IRS, who has to write the code and get it implemented for January 1st, 2025. It is massive for the farm industry, for family farms, and finally able to get farmers a scoreboard for sustainability, show us how to score points with the GREET model, and financially reward us for the more points that we garner into the industry, the more dollars that we get in our pocket. It is the biggest thing, and there's hardly anybody looking at it or talking about it, and we really need to get that to go and expand that opportunity for other verticals as well. Right now, it's only renewable fuels. We need to learn from that policy and take it into other verticals of ag.
What a great conversation, and no question, just an unbelievable amount of talent and intellect and passion for these conversations that we're having here today, visible up on this stage right now. Folks, please join me in thanking our panelists.